Thank you all for coming today. We have a group of people who are in the room with us, and I know that we also have a number of people who are online. So thanks to everybody for attending our science seminar here at the Oregon Institute of Occupational Health Sciences at Oregon Health and Science University. I am Leslie Hammer. I'm the Associate Director of Applied Research, and it is my pleasure to introduce my friend of many years and colleague, Dr. Alicia Grande. And Dr. Grande she's an industrial organizational psychologist, and she's had her degree for over 25 years, which I could not believe. She's been at Penn State over 25 years, because I remember talking to her as a graduate student when she was a graduate student, and I must have just been a brand new faculty member, I guess. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's Leslie here. And we have collaborated, and we have remained friends throughout the years. Alicia has published over 75 articles and chapters on emotional labor and workforce diversity. And she's also co-edited a 2013 book on emotional labor in the 20th century, and is now co-authoring a book that I've been hearing about and very excited for when it comes out, called Emotionally Charged. And it's a book about and for managers today. Her research has received national grant funding from NSF, scholarly awards, and over 35,000 citations, placing her in the top 1% of translational articles, top 1% for impact among business and management scholars. And she also writes translational articles in the Harvard Business Review, The Conversation, and recently founded Penn State's Healthy, Inclusive, Productive Workplace Initiative, HIP, with interdisciplinary scholars and industry advisory board. She's received the Eisenhower Award for Distinguished Teaching at Penn State, and she is about to receive the Distinguished Contributions for Teaching Award by SIOP, the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology. And she also, with all of this, serves as an associate editor for Journal of Occupational Health Psychology, or she did, and then she's currently serving as associate editor for Journal of Applied Psychology. And she's also a fellow of SIOP and APS, and I'm going to talk to you about APA. So it's my pleasure. I'm going to turn it over. Alicia has a lot to say and a lot to share about her recent work on women and menopause and workplace and menopause. And she's going to be sharing a lot, and she will receive questions. So for those online, please raise your hand, and we have somebody monitoring the chat, and she will answer questions throughout. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here, making the trek to be here in person. I do want to say I am used to talking about menopause to people who don't have as much maybe medical background or science background, so this is a little intimidating. But I'm really looking forward to learning a lot. I am also used to having a little bit more time for this talk, but I don't want to rush things. I really enjoy it being a back and forth. And so we're just going to, and I understand there isn't a class right after us, so we'll, if there's questions after, we can take those after, but feel free to jump in anytime if there's questions. There's no exam, right? Don't have to get through all the slides. So just a little bit about me to orient us. There we go. Part of what I'm talking about and what my research is on is the merging or the intersection of a conflict between the professional and the personal. So I like to do a little background about my professional and personal. So like Leslie said, I've been at Penn State for 25 years. That's me next to our famous Nittany Lion on the bottom there. I love advising and teaching students. That's my current research lab. And this is me with my co-author, Dina, who I also went to graduate school with at Colorado State University. So these long-lived relationships really matter for our personal and professional lives. And this is also me. I'm a mom of 2 kids. My 18-year-old is now at Penn State as a freshman, and my son is a freshman in high school. And my mother, who was born in the Penn State area, is now back at a retirement village at Penn State. So we all love our Penn State. It's the other PSU. That's right. Yeah. And so this is just kind of a Venn diagram of the research that I've done over the last 25 years and how it all fits together with this idea of professional and personal intersections. I'm probably most well known for the area of emotional labor. That was what I did my dissertation on. I actually learned about the impetus for studying emotional labor came from a class I took here at Portland State. So I want to shout out to a sociology class on women in management. I don't remember the professor's name, but I wish I could. I have to go figure that out. And she assigned Arlie Hochschild's original book, The Managed Part, and that planted the seed that then 5 years later I did it for my dissertation and expanded on that. So I have a lot of years under that. This is the most recent review article on the topic, which is really about merging our personal feelings with the professional expectations on us, whether it's as teachers or healthcare providers, managers, and how we often have to manage those emotions in order to perform professionally. I've also done work on how we merge our personal needs for sleep, say, with our work-related demands. And then thinking about mistreatment, it's like our personal identities, whether it's our race, our ethnicity, our gender, and how sometimes that is incongruent with people's expectations of us, resulting in mistreatment. And so we have some research on sexual harassment recently. So I've taken a bit of a turn, and I was talking to the students yesterday, and I just think it's helpful to kind of give a little framework of how that happens, like where do these research ideas come from, and then I'll use that to lead into this current research on menopause. Because obviously menopause doesn't screen out from those three things I just talked about in studying. So a lot of what we do as scientists is research is me search. Right? So I had an experience, a lived experience, where I was in a very stuffy room in a liberal arts office. And I was getting warmer and warmer. And this is early on. I wasn't sure what was happening. I just knew I was getting really warm. And finally, the dean got up and opened the window. And I said, oh, thank goodness, I thought I was having a hot flash. And he threw up his hand. It's like, I don't want to hear about that. Now, this is a guy I'm friendly with. He's a great guy, no problem. But it was like he didn't think about it. We don't talk about that here. And I just thought, well, how interesting. And then, of course, realized I was probably having hot flashes. So I started doing more of a literature review, because that should be our next step, right? What do we know about this, menopause in the workplace? Do people respond this way at work? This question led to this recent paper where we talked about the 3 M's in working women's lives. So what are the 3 M's in the taboo topics, the 3 M's of a working woman's life? Some of you know, you can't say. What do you think? Maternity. Maternity, right? Obviously, I'm talking about menopause today. And the first one? No, it has nothing to do with men. Menstruation, thank you, yeah. So menstruation, maternity, and you're not the only one that says that. Marriage and men. People say it's not your fault. So what we did was we tied those in with the kind of the career phase from being an early young employee, maybe as a service worker starting out, where often the menstrual problems might be most likely to be occurring. Maternity, of course, happening more mid-career, and the menopause happening more late career. And through that, realizing that menopause was not very well studied in our literature. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But then realizing as I started looking at this, I kept seeing it in the news. And it's like menopause is having a moment. Now, this could be me, because I realize once you start to study something, you see it everywhere. You know what I mean? Like it's just suddenly like you're primed to see it. But it's just like, I feel like it's everywhere. So there were cases in the UK, they were trying to get new policies, there were discrimination cases. It was being pointed to as a reason that women were leaving the workforce. And a lot of it was pointing out how the symptoms there was ignorance around the symptoms, and they were not being accommodated at work because women didn't feel comfortable saying that was happening. So a quick, what is menopause? Because part of what I am doing and giving these talks is the quick public service announcement, because part of the problem is we don't talk about it. Even medical professionals don't talk to us as women that might be going through it about it at the level that you might expect, given that it's a natural aging process for people with reproductive organs. So the process, and again, here's where maybe you all know because you have more medical background than me, but just in case there might be some less familiarity. It is actually a 3-phase process. The perimenopausal stage starts a lot earlier than people expect. So I've found from talking to lots of audiences of young women, they're very surprised to learn that symptoms typically start in the early to mid 40s. So this, and it can happen earlier. This is of course on average. And this is the time of change where the estradiol, progesterone, and FSH levels are wildly fluctuating, more so than throughout the month. over time, and then gradually declining those levels to the point when there's no longer any menstruation. That is what's known as menopause. So basically, after 12 months of no monthly cycles is menopause, which means menopause as a stage is one day. The day after it's been 12 months that you haven't had your monthly cycle. And then you're considered postmenopausal after that. So these symptoms can occur at any of these stages. They're most likely, like I said, here. But what's really fascinating to me is that these changes and the experiences for women that might be causing distress or might be visible at work or might be somehow seen negatively are happening from the mid-40s to the early 50s, which is the same time frame that women are often moving into leadership roles or at a stage of their career where maybe they're more visible. And so we started thinking, well, that's an interesting juxtaposition. Like the average age of a CEO is 54. And the average age of a woman reaching menopause is 51. So could there be a link, or is that just, random chance? So it's important to know also that the way we tend to study it is there's two lenses, and I'm going to merge these two lenses in the research I'm presenting today. So the first lens is kind of more a feminist aging psychology lens, which is around the idea of it's a midlife identity shift. So women experience this. The research is on surveys and interviews asking women about their experience. And these experiences can be positive or negative. They can run the whole gamut, right? There's as many different experiences of menopause as there are many types of women and people with reproductive organs. So it's a time that can be very energizing. It can be a time where it's like you're no longer likely to have a child. There's relief there, moving into more productive roles. So you're more ready to be potentially a leader of an organization. But the focus that has the most attention, certainly in the news, is the more medical lens, which is more about the symptoms. And that is often then where you get this idea that it's a loss, it's an estrogen deficiency, and it needs intervention, which is true for some women. For some people with reproductive organs, there is a really distressing experience. There's a lot of different types of symptoms that can occur, and there is need for medical intervention. But that's not true for all women. Okay? So we have this, both positive and negative identity shift, and we have this kind of more negative focus, and this is where most of the attention has been. So across this research, what we know is that from women's experiences in this research that's survey and interview based, women perceive stigma. They perceive that it would be unwise for others to know that they're menopausal or to see them having symptoms because they believe that they will be seen negatively and not fit for or suitable for the career transitions or the promotions they might want. And that's consistent with the evidence I showed you at the beginning from the newspaper articles. People feeling like they need to leave or they opted out because they just couldn't get the support they needed at work. But we really don't have at this point, until this research I'm going to present today, evidence about how people actually view women having symptoms or being seen as menopausal. So what I'm going to present to you is kind of that other person's perspective, so more of a social cognitive psychology lens of this question. And that requires thinking about how would anyone know someone's menopausal, given women don't tend to talk about it. So the focus of what I will be talking about today is on the observable symptoms of hot flashes. So going back to my lived experience, where you have a reddening of the face, you start to sweat, you might start fanning yourself, and it is the body, I think of it as a superpower personally. Like if the air conditioning, it turns off and it re-regulates, my body knows before the air conditioning system knows that it's time to kick in the air conditioning. Like I know within 1 degree, and thermostats typically are 2 degrees before it turns on. I know within 1 degree, right? It's just your body is very attentive. I don't want to say sensitive because that has negative weight. Attentive to temperature cues. And then your body sweats in order to cool yourself back down, right? Which is functional. But it's visible, right? It's an observable experience that can be seen not positively, potentially. Right? So the question is, what happens if a woman's experiencing that? How do people perceive that? And then how do they perceive it if she is to say that that's what it is, that it's menopause? So I'm drawing on the social cognitive lens of stigma to test whether there is stigma, whether menopause carries stigma when it is observable based on symptoms at work. And the idea might be that it activates stereotypes that are consistent with gendered aging. So being, the body being weaker as we become older, things that are considered gendered, which would be pitiable, right? The weak woman as one is aging becomes stronger. And then of course, just the stigma around physical symptoms like sweating, right? All of those are likely to result in what overall is known as agency being low. Agency refers to kind of more masculine characteristics, assertiveness, competitiveness, strength, confidence, competence, things that are very linked to leadership in our society. So then it could be used to discriminate or to activate ideas that, oh, this person's not a good fit for leadership roles, if that's the process. So this is the question that we go in with is, this is something that is a natural aging, gendered aging experience. It's experienced by pretty much half the workforce, given the workforce is 47% female. It should be, it's not a disability, because if it is, then women's bodies are disabled. So maybe it's not a problem, and maybe women are just assuming it is. But maybe it activates these stereotypes, and that can help explain gender disparities in leadership roles. So that's the setup. Questions before I jump into the results.
So, I mean, it's not as severe in men, but men goes through a kind of a, thing, whatever you call it.
It's andropause.
Okay. So is that even a awareness out there for that? Because I kind of say the same thing for men at a certain age.
Yeah, so I think it's so fascinating, and I have some ideas. I don't know quite how to study with the tools that I have, but I'm looking for people that might be interested. So, yeah, women's bodies are having these fluctuations of estrogen and progesterone, and that means that the ratio of their body's testosterone is leveling out, right? And so that's one of the explanations for how women might become actually more agentic. If their testosterone ratios to estrogen ratios are changing in that way. More agentic. Testosterone being linked to assertiveness and aggressive tendencies. Men's are gradually, much more gradually than women's, but gradually declining in testosterone, as you're saying. That means their ratio to the estrogen and progesterone that's naturally in their bodies is also changing. We're basically all becoming more like each other over time. And of course, we know that androgynous leaders are actually ideal, right? Having the best of both qualities, the tendencies of agency and warmth. So I think that there's a really interesting, inherent in what you're asking, is that really interesting question of like, are we all changing in a way that we're all becoming kind of better humans? Because we're letting go socially, normatively of some of those norms, but also just hormonally becoming more similar. I don't know quite how to test that. But I think it makes some sense. I will say though that so men also have a different reaction to testosterone levels declining, and that's where you get the midlife crisis effect, which has been kind of debunked. It's kind of a societal thing. But what's the midlife crisis? What's the classic midlife crisis? Porsche, get a car, get a really let's have an affair, right? So these are ways of asserting the masculinity, right? Asserting the testosterone's still there even as it's declining. So I think there's similar things happening, but they're different too. Different responses to those things happening.
A very related comment is about there's trend meta-analysis suggests that as people get older in their career, later in their career, they are more likely to serve the role of mentorship and supporting junior folks, and because they wanted to make a difference by the pro-social impact. So that might also be related to biological, the hormonal changes for both men and women. I wonder if there's any differences.
Well, and if you go with what I just said, so maybe women are reasserting their feminine side by being more pro-social. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have this is just an interesting idea,
We'll come the same thing.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's idea papers on this, but I don't know ways to test it. Linking the hormonal changes to the behaviors is tricky, obviously. But yes, Thank you. And my first study will speak to what can we tease out effects with men. Men can have hot flashes, and people can for a variety of reasons, not just menopause. So I'll present some evidence. Was there a question from the group?
Not a question, but a comment. Laura Benjamin says men's hormones decline slower, giving the body a bit more time to adjust than mine. Women are going through changes similar to those in adolescence, more dramatic.
Yes. Yeah, it's been called like reverse puberty. Yeah. Menopause. Right. Exactly. Okay, so the other piece that I will be presenting in this research is the intersectionality. So this is an embodied experience. And so part of when we're thinking about how do people respond to a bodily sign of menopause, which is gendered aging, can also be racialized. So we know that Black women and white women tend to have more hot flashes than Asian and Hispanic women, and more frequent and more distressing, more intense. With Black women, it being slightly higher than white women, which might mean it's more likely to be observed at work. But there's also differences in terms of stereotypes for Black and white women, where Black women tend to be seen as more agentic than white women. So we kind of just pose this as a question, like how does this embodied experience of seeing someone have a hot flash that's gendered aging, how does that maybe work differently if it's racialized gendered aging, if it's a Black woman or a white woman seen with the same symptoms?
I have a question.
Yes.
So are you using hot flashes as the main symptom in the workplace that's visible?
Correct.
Okay. I only ask that because my experience and of women in my peer group is that, yes, that is true, but perhaps the more severe symptom is insomnia,
Okay. Yeah.
which is, you can hide it, but it's debilitating.
Right.
So I just
Yes.
put that out there.
And it's related.
Oh,
Night sweats is hot flashes
yeah,
at night,
so
and that's part of what, yes.
Maybe more hidden, but
Absolutely.
it's a really important one to consider.
Yeah, and that's worth pointing out that some of the symptoms, and that's, I mean, right. So part of what I was trying to do was identify a symptom that's both observable,
Right.
but also is uniquely menopausal.
Mm-hmm.
So insomnia happens for lots of reasons, but it also can occur during the maturity stage, right? And to lots of people. And so it's certainly absolutely connected to the menopausal experience. And it could be an objective reason why women may actually not perform as well,
Yeah.
right? So what I'm trying to show here is there, if we hold everything else constant and we look at a symptom that has not been found to actually interfere with performance, I mean, it's distracting in that one moment that it's happening, but right, then is that itself also creating that disparity? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So thank you. Yeah, fair point. So here's where we're at, right? The first hypothesis, and does that vary by race? So the first thing I do is look at an existing data set. You're probably familiar with the MIDAS data set. Dave Almeida at Penn State is a colleague of mine. He was involved in the initial collection of this data. And so this is about middle age, and they did have people's reportings of hot flashes. So we used that, and we're just trying to get like prima facie evidence, just like, is there a relationship between the amount of hot flashes one is having at one point in time and their leadership status, or are they a manager or supervisor later in time? This isn't perfect. It's a long time lag. You know, that this is the data that was available, but it is real world data. It is actual employees. We limited it to people who were working at both time points. And we're also, because it's a large data set, we're also able then to look at the intersection of gender with these hot flashes and race among the women with these hot flashes. So the intersectionality. So the initial direct effect was not significant in the full data set. Looking across all group members, it's negative, but you can see it's not significant. It's not starred. Those who had a leadership role at the first point in time were more likely to have one at a later point in time. Men were more likely than women to be leaders later in time. So both of those are what we would expect from the evidence. So the data is working as we might think. Now let's look and see what happens if we take men into consideration versus women. So men did not have hot flashes as frequently as women. It was pretty rare, but they did have them. So we look at the interaction of sex of the employee and hot flash frequency, and we do see then a significant interaction. So what you see here is that for women, the trend is negative. So as more hot flashes increase, the likelihood of being a leader later in time decreases. That was not true for men. And while it is a positive trend, you can see a very wide confidence interval. Now, this is still not significant. So there's still not a significant negative relationship between hot flashes and leadership. And that is probably because it does also vary by race. So when we look among the women, we see that the relationship is significant for white women. It is a significant negative relationship. The more hot flashes, the less likelihood of being a supervisor later in time. That is not present. It is non-significant for Black women. This is consistent with the idea that Black women being stereotyped as more agentic might shield them from the activation of the stereotype that they're not agentic when they see a hot flash. But that's an inference, of course, because in this data set, we're not talking about, we don't know if it's happening at work. We don't know if the leadership status is because of stereotypes. All we know is there's a relationship. So then the next study I designed was to look at it in an experimental vignette. So now we're going to control for the presence of hot flashes. We're going to manipulate if it is a Black woman or a white woman, but we're going to hold everything else constant. And the setup is that it is a group project, and this was done with prolific, it's not students, it's prolific adult employees, full-time employees. So they're instructed, they're a coworker, they're new to this group. They've arrived first in this office, and they're watching people come in. They're told there's a middle-aged woman and a middle-aged man that are in there, as well as two other employees, and they're going to talk project, and then they will be moving on to the new project that you, the participant, will be part of, and you get to help determine who will be leading that next project. So that way there's a reason to rate the leadership. Okay. So we manipulate, so we have a middle-aged woman, again, Black or white woman, that is not described as having symptoms. A middle-aged woman that is described as having hot flash symptoms. So she gets suddenly red in the middle of the meeting. She starts fanning herself. She takes off a layer. She looks for a tissue. So a couple of different behaviors to activate that perception. And then we also had a third condition where we had her say, to make it explicit, I'm menopausal. Our thinking there is that we are increasing the certainty that she is menopausal. Right, that's what you're observing, as opposed to other attributions that could be made, which could have different effects, right? So if the assumption is that menopause carries stigma, then it should make it worse. Now I know for certain she's menopausal, and that's bad. At the same time, we know that disclosure can be beneficial. And in fact, disclosing is an agentic act. It's taking ownership, it's claiming an identity for oneself, and it's being proactive about it. It's reducing uncertainty. So we kind of set up these competing hypotheses, knowing the literature on disclosure. So we're pitting the stigma of menopause with the agentic act of disclosure in this condition. So first is just the manipulation check, and this is really interesting. What you can see here is that when the person is described as having the symptoms, so the middle bar, she's just as likely to be seen as having an anxiety disorder. That was one of our manipulation checks, as she is as being seen as menopausal. Now, women, it is sometimes a stereotype that women that are menopausal also have mood disorders, so those could be linked. Or it could be that it's seen as a panic attack, right? If you're seen suddenly getting warm in the middle of a meeting, and of course it's a meeting where people are having to share things. We, by the way, held constant how much people were involved in the meeting. But when she discloses, we've increased the certainty that it's menopause and decreased the likelihood it's anxiety. Okay, so we're able now to tease apart the attribution of menopause. So first, let's look at what happens with the symptom versus no symptom and race as the intersection. And what you can see here is that we do get a decline in agency judgment. So again, agency is a rating. It's a well-established stereotype scale of competence and confidence, basically. Mastery behaviors, including like competitiveness and assertiveness and confidence, as well as competence and intelligence. So we get a reduction in that when we see the woman with symptoms that is stronger for the white woman. than it is for the Black woman. It's not a significant overall interaction, but the simple slopes, it's only significant for the white woman, just like it was in the Midas data set. So that's maybe not super surprising. Seeing someone having symptoms is not as desirable as seeing someone who is, or sorry, other way around. But we do also show that that predicts leadership ratings, which again isn't super surprising because we know agency is very strongly linked to leadership. So agency judgments explains the link between symptoms and leadership in a way that's consistent with the stigma model. Okay, so this seems to suggest that that symptom of menopause does carry stigma. What happens when she, and it's not due to warmth, I should say. So interpersonal warmth being another gendered aging stereotype.
I wonder if the prolific participants were reported their race and whether you factored it into your bounty.
Yeah, so, and we also took into account their gender, and it doesn't make a difference. And that, thank you for asking that question, because we do that with every study. We take into account the participants' intersectionality of gender and race and age, and it doesn't change, which to me suggests that it's meta stereotypes. Right? We have beliefs, even if I myself am in that group that I'm observing, we kind of know what the stereotype is of that group, right? Yeah. It also could be that it's based on whether you've actually had the experience of having hot flashes, and that's a more narrow subset, in which case it's harder, we don't have the power to test that. Just also a note that in addition to the symptoms making the woman look less like a leader than no symptoms, she is now seen as less desirable than the man who has no symptoms. So this is, there's no gender difference in leader ratings without symptoms, and there is when there are symptoms. So in terms of like, who should be the leader, the man's gonna get chosen if symptoms occur. Okay, so this is again, consistent with the stigma model and symptoms. And remember, like the survey studies and the qualitative studies have described women saying, oh my gosh, it's so awful when I have a hot flash at work. I try to hide it. I don't want to say anything. I don't want anyone to know, but this is what is potentially happening. So now what happens when she says, I'm menopausal, I'm having a hot flash? Is that menopausal time of life? What do you think? Is that going to make it even worse? Because now we can see she's definitely menopausal, activating all the symptoms, or is it going to make it go up? Oh, she's so agentic and confident by saying that. Flat. Flat, okay. So the same. What do you say?
I say it's going up.
Going up? And you know, going up?
I'm much more pessimistic.
I say it's gonna make everybody super brilliant.
So people going down. Okay, right. So this is why we posted it as a research question, because we were like, we can make the case either way. So it went up. And it went up to a similar level of not having symptoms. And we were like, I don't even know what to do with that. Like, if the conclusion then is, oh, so everyone should disclose then they're having symptoms, that kind of goes against what all of the qualitative and survey data said. We don't want to tell women you're just wrong, your perception, like that doesn't feel comfortable until we have more evidence we can feel more confident about. So, and of course the reviewers also made us come back with more data. So disclosure was seen as an agentic act. So disclosure versus no disclosure, so holding constant symptoms, increased the perception of agency compared to symptoms without disclosure. So now, we're holding constant symptoms, but disclosing is seen as more agentic, and now that is increasing leader desirability.
Can you distinguish somehow if it's not disclosed, they might think it's something else,
Yes.
It's depressed or
Or anxious.
blah, blah, blah. And it's, the stigma is actually that one and not the menopause thing.
Were you a reviewer on our? Precisely. No, that's precisely the concern. So I have two more studies, and I think we're okay for time, to tease apart what's going on here. And again, if we're going to go on record saying it would be best for women to disclose their symptoms are menopausal, we better be sure that that's the case. So in the first study, we looked at disclosure more closely. Is the increase in agency due to self-disclosing, right? If it is an agentic act that's having this benefit, then it has to be self-disclosure. But if it's simply improving the perception of what's happening versus it being uncertain or due to something else, then anyone disclosing it should make it better. Just knowing what it is, knowing it's menopausal versus not menopausal should improve reactions. So we had to think of a way to tease those apart that was realistic, right? And we came up with a version of that scenario where in all cases, she steps out of the room. But in one case, she first says, I'm menopausal, and then steps out of the room. And in another case, she steps out of the room and a colleague says, oh, it's okay, she's menopausal. So it's the same words and matter-of-factly stated, but someone else says it. So someone else labels it as menopause. So there is, and in the third condition, there's no labeling. Like you just see the symptoms as in the other study that I've described.
Having somebody else label them as menopausal, that
Seems what?
yeah, I think that would
Not realistic.
not realistic. Or if I saw somebody label somebody else as menopausal, I would think that they don't know what they're talking about, and I think it's inappropriate.
Okay. So we get even worse ratings, like, so she's even lower in agency, right?
Well,
Saying it.
Okay.
So
yes.
that's her at the same
Yes.
agency, but it moves them down.
Yeah,
It's
it's just,
There's one more comment.
Okay.
One more comment.
so it doesn't affect it. Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't affect her.
Is it a woman or a man?
So, so we tried, it's a fair point. We tried to make it as realistic as we could and have it be, I don't think he said, but it was a mixed gendered group. And it was said in a way, and I wish I had the exact, it was said in a way that we were trying to, it wasn't like a snide comment. You know what I mean? It was said just very much about, oh, it's just she's having a hot flash. I think they both, in all conditions, they say the same thing, but she'll be back in a minute. It's just a hot flash. So it's said in a very matter-of-fact way. It's not like, oh my God, roll of the eyes, she's having a hot flash, you know? And I believe we had it so that, I think it would have been inferred as a female. I can't remember if we said it explicitly or not, but there were women in the group.
I think how this is occurring. Are people walking into a building? Does this happen?
So it's the same scenario with the group project, and they're in the group project, and then,
But it's a vignette.
yes, it's a visit.
So I think that's one of the things.
Scenario.
Are they reading it?
Yes.
Or are they seeing it?
They're reading it.
They're just reading.
And we show this picture.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so they see this visual. So we're increasing the reality. So in that first one I showed you, they just saw the faces and then a verbal description. This study, we actually showed this face. So it's now just a white woman, and you see the sweat, you see the discomfort.
Yeah, I have a thought while you were speaking is what if you create another condition, asking a teammate saying, oh, she says she's having menopause.
So to be clear that I know something, she's told
It's a
me.
fact, so
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
holding.
I think this is all reasonable. Too bad you weren't all around 2 years ago when I gathered this data.
Yes.
So what we see here is, so I think it's consistent with what you're saying. There's someone else saying she's menopausal, good or bad. It basically isn't significantly different.
Yeah.
But it's not worse. And it's not like this is the agentic, but now we know she's menopausal, but she didn't say it and therefore now she's seen as less menopausal. You know, like that would be another argument is someone else voiced for her and therefore she's seen as weaker, right? Someone else had to speak up for her. So having all of them have the symptoms, but when she claims that I'm menopausal before stepping out of the room, she's actually seen as more agentic than no symptoms, or sorry, no disclosure, same symptoms. So, and this one is not significantly different. So it seems like there's not a menopausal identity is bad effect, right? So in both of these, she's being identified as menopausal and it's not making it worse. So maybe now we're back to well, is this just being attributed to something that's even worse, right? And so knowing menopause is actually better than the alternative. This was what, And then again, this is through agency that it works. And here we ask them again, what is your perception of what's happening? And to what extent do you think that she's experiencing anxiety, embarrassment, other anxiety related emotions? And you can see here that when it's just the symptoms without menopausal disclosure, it is seen as more anxiety. She is seen as more anxious. And when she discloses that it's menopausal, that goes down. Just like in that first study when I told you about the manipulation check, when she discloses menopause, then the belief that it's anxiety disorder goes down and menopause goes up. Here, the perception of anxiety goes down with menopause. Same symptoms, but attributing it to menopause is now less seen as anxiety. But anxiety didn't carry the effect to leadership. So while it did have an effect on anxiety, anxiety wasn't the reason. Agency was the reason that leadership was affected, leadership ratings. But for the last study, which again, reviewers said we needed to do, and thank you, clearly it was a good idea, to differentiate disclosure from labeling other types of health conditions. So what we have in this study is we see again, or we actually do a description and we go back to black and white differences just to make sure we're not missing something there. Is she menopausal? And we see the symptoms with no attribution. And then the description, the scenario is you are in HR, so you have access to her medical records. So we're trying to find out what's a realistic way to know what her condition is without disclosure. Okay, that's our challenge. So we're trying to remove disclosure from the puzzle here and just look at the label, the diagnosis. Okay. So now you find out that those symptoms are menopausal. So either you don't know, you know that they're menopausal, or you know they're anxiety. She has anxiety-related symptoms, or you know that they're allergies. So she has, some kind of physical reaction to something, which is not a stigmatized or gendered condition. Okay, so now we're thinking, well, clearly having the symptoms being menopausal is worse than no symptoms. Sorry, that's the control condition, is no symptoms. So either she has the symptoms that are labeled as menopause versus none. That's got to be worse. But maybe it's not as bad as anxiety, but it's worse than allergies, right? It's going to fall in the middle. This is kind of our expectation. So this is, again, in terms of agency ratings, and it's a similar pattern for leadership. I think that's my next slide. And we get what we expect, where anxiety is seen as less agency than allergies, right? Which is not a stigmatized thing. And this makes sense. I mean, agency is partially about confidence, right? So anxiety would seem like not confident, right? So what do you think happens with menopause? Yes.
I apologize, I don't understand.
Okay.
When it says anxiety and stigma, I can understand that society labels it as that, but are you saying that here in this experiment that somebody says, or in the vignette it is stated, that this person has anxiety disorder?
Thank you for asking the question. So it's the same scenario of you come into the room, you're observing this group project with the table and everything. But you are an HR director.
Right.
And sorry, I missed a key point that would be helpful. You're an HR director who is looking for people to be in leadership development.
Right.
And you're going to go now back to your office and look at your files and look at your notes. And part of the files includes information about their medical records.
Okay. I think I understand, but so they're not in this situation stating, I have anxiety.
Correct. No one's saying that.
Because that is full-on agency, right?
Correct. That's what we saw in the prior study.
Okay.
So we're trying to remove that agentic act and see what happens if we just know the information without the acts, right? Because it kind of is seeming like menopausal is a good thing.
That's an amazing HR department you got there.
It's an amazing one.
I don't think that line of illness is in our HR. I hope I'm careful.
Well, I'll tell you what, Steve, if you come up with a better way to design this study, I would love to hear it. Because basically the AE told us, you need to tease apart disclosure. And it's like, what's a realistic way?
Yeah.
I mean, this is going back again to the qualitative and the interview research. Women believe they have internalized stigma They believe that it's stigmatized, so they do not want to disclose,
I believe
right?
and sell it to the people in the room that HR
Okay.
might know such a thing.
Okay. This form actually did come from an online HR website, so. So general nature of illness or injury, right? It's a report, it's a medical report,
Yeah.
and you have access to it. And in the no symptoms condition, this is blank. And then you either see experiencing menopause related, anxiety related, or allergy related symptoms.
Right.
Okay,
Would that kind of mean that there was some kind of incident, right?
correct, yeah,
So there's already, it has affected somehow. Is that?
it's true. So it should be really bad.
Well.
I mean, that would be the inference, right? Is like something bad has happened. You see where I'm going, I hope.
But that something bad happened would also be the case for allergy, that's the thing, allergy.
Yeah.
That's right.
One wouldn't go there.
Right. So no symptoms clearly should be the best, right? So menopause was seen as more agentic than either of the other two and better than no symptoms.
It's significant.
It was significant, and I'm sorry I left it off this, because it's like, I don't even know how to explain this, other than menopausal identity is seen as agentic. And this goes back to the hormonal thing.
Wait, even if it's just on the HR record, I'm getting confused.
Yeah.
So
So,
the HR person saying, oh, this one's menopausal, she's a good candidate for leadership?
yeah, compared to no symptoms.
Right on.
Yeah. And this is holding constant age, you know, like we did manipulate race, race didn't matter in this scenario. Holding constant age and gender, the description of the scenario is the same in terms of their performance and their, you know, capabilities demonstrated during the scenario.
Can you remind us what the age of the participants were?
This is working adults, so it's, I mean, I think on average, it's like 42. I'd have to double check.
That seems to be
But age doesn't interact with the findings.
participant age,
Sorry?
participant's age, the
Well, I was asking about, no, the
participants.
the prolific
Prolific.
in the town, yeah.
Yeah.
And how big was the sample size?
Well, I
Can
I
I,
mean, all of
can you hear?
at least 45 to 50 people per cell.
Yeah, wonder increasing sample size
To do what?
for replication, because I know like the recommendation.
I'm not even showing you two other data sets, okay? Which, where we do the same, so just so you know, I mean, because I realize this is like super, like, really? We also did a study where we did your basic social psych label. What do you think about menopausal coworkers versus middle-aged women coworkers versus middle-aged men coworkers? So no symptoms. And there was only gender differences in terms of middle-aged women were actually seen as more competent than middle-aged men, but less confident, which is standard. That's the Eagly meta-analysis that just came out showing gender disparities are decreasing competence, but or the same. Men still rate themselves as more confident, and people still think they're more confident than women. And warmth, women still have the gender bonus, right? And that was also true for menopausal women and middle-aged women more than men. The only item that was different for menopausal women was the one item of confidence, that menopausal women were seen as less confident than middle-aged women, but not all the other items that represent agency. So even if you take out the symptoms, there wasn't a cost to being labeled as menopausal in that study.
I'm kind of wondering if it's actually kind of, in a certain way, seem positive, because, you know, if you're menopausal, you know, at some point, and you don't have to deal with things, I mean, you're not kind of focused on leadership.
Right.
You won't have kids anymore, and,
Right.
you know, you're all over that, and so I kind of.
Yeah. Well, this is how I usually, it's so funny you say that. So this is how I usually start my talks, right? Is I introduce the 3 M's, and then I say, okay, so we know there's stigma around menstruation, and we know there's stigma around maternity, and when you're menopausal, you're getting rid of both of those, so clearly it's the best, ha, ha, ha. Now you don't have stigma anymore, but surely we won't find that. Oh,
But, you know, one of the things.
I'm sorry, there is a hand raised up
This
there.
one will handle
Yes,
that.
we have a question from Laura online. Are we then seeing a difference in proportion of women leaders that is the result of self-exclusion? In a sense, women might be feeling that their menopause symptoms make leadership difficult for them.
Yes, so it could be the idea, well, no, sorry. So there absolutely is and could be, not part of our study, but the opting out. So leadership researchers have talked about the gender disparity as it being either women are opting out or they're being pushed out. This study is, are they being pushed out due to stigma? Not about are they opting out by their own choice, which we already know, right? So when women experience menopausal symptoms, they experience the expectation of stigma, as well as the insomnia and other things that make them think that I don't want to be a leader right now. And so they may very well be choosing to opt out of the workforce as well as leadership roles, for sure. But in this data, I would say we're still seeing signs that they might be pushed out or that there is stigma if the symptoms are happening, which we know they are. They're very commonly experienced by menopausal women, and they're not explained. So when we lack education or information about menopausal symptoms and we don't disclose what they are, we do see the potential for stigma and pushing out of leadership roles, whether or not the woman chooses to have them. So I see this and then
I was wondering if some of these results are also, you know, kind of in line with suffering is equal to strength and that kind of stuff. And I was wondering if that was also something that gets factored in as far as.
So like a resilience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that framing personally, and I want that to be true.
Okay.
That would be another study I would like to do is can we frame this? I mean, all of the 3 M's. Right? Women experience bodily discomfort and pain in ways that are unique to their female bodies and capabilities that may very well make them have certain capacities for things that include leadership, kind of do with being aware of pain, being aware and having strength and resilience they didn't even know they had without those experiences, right? I also think, and this, I'll go a little bit on a soapbox for just a sec. Menopause, I think, is a time that makes us tune in to our bodies and to what we might want. And I know Leslie's written about the sandwich generation and how you're kind of like, you're moving out of being sandwiched between the child rearing and the elder care. You're now kind of aging into being able to take care of yourself. And your body is saying it's time to do that. And I will say personally, that was my experience, is my body's saying something's not right. You know, like look around and figure out what do you want to do. It's why middle age is considered that time where we kind of, you know, you see that dip in happiness, the happiness curve that's been well documented, but then it goes back up again. Like we're taking stock of where am I at with my life and is this what I want, right? And our body is doing this internally is a way of making us look within, not just out at our roles in our lives and other people that need our attention. So, sorry.
That's great. I'm going to just say you have 5 minutes left for the presentation and the people online maybe going in 5 minutes. So
Okay.
if you want to take
So
questions.
I saw your question. Can we maybe hold and I'll just wrap up since I know people will start running out. And then if we have time at the end. Okay. But I'm basically done. So this is the leadership rating, not just agency rating. So in summary, just back to that other point. So the symptoms, I think, are happening for people who are menopausal and they are stigmatized. It's the identity that we don't see evidence for that stigma. And if anything, it seems to carry benefits, which could be for the reasons that have been raised here. It could be hormonal, it could be resilience, it could be you're seen in a more positive way than actually would be expected from the stigma literature. And that would be the next study. So hopefully the reviewers won't ask me to do that. I also have some data just showing that women actually do describe this disclosure dilemma. Here you can see like about a third are saying they don't want to disclose versus disclose, just so you know, in real life, people are wrestling with this decision. And so just practically, I mean, I think this speaks to the need for education. So knowing that it's menopausal and that it's not related to actual performance decrements, I think is important, not just for women to know, but for all employees to know. Having supports like employee resource groups so that women can talk about their symptoms and get support from each other. That's the other benefit, by the way, of disclosure. I mean, if any of you have been in a room where you're having a condition that someone else, like if you share it, someone else is like, I know you, like I see you, I got you, I've had that. It can create a lot of support that is very positive in the workplace as well. Work practices a very, very easy fix is a fan. I personally had a $5 fan from, some 5 and dime store, and it is a lifesaver. And when that student comes into my office and it raises the temperature in my room by 1 degree and my body goes, what am I doing? I just flip on that fan, all good, no problem. The weird thing is a lot of workplaces won't let people have any personal effects on their desk. It blows my mind, like even a little fan. So that's a very simple fix. Others include like uniforms, if they're polyester or high necks, that can add problems that don't need to exist. And of course, an inclusive climate where people feel safe sharing is important. Not all women will feel safe disclosing. I want to mention that I was part of this the Society for Women's Health Research Network, which is in DC, where we put together a resource guide that is available for both managers and for women. This included people with medical backgrounds as well as people like myself and more organizational mindsets. And then lots of future directions I don't have time to go into. Lots of people talking about it that are saying great things. And if anyone's interested in learning more, I highly recommend this book. Love it. She goes through the history of menopause as a topic, and I'll leave you with this quote. No greater act of feminism than speaking up about a menopausal body in a patriarchal society. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I know that Alicia's offered to stick around and answer questions either online or in the room, but I just wanted to say that we can also, if people need to leave, they can leave. But I'll let you.
So there was a question here and a question here. Did you still have your question?
Oh, you have it on a slide. You see the percent of women that actually exhibit symptoms. Hot flashes, I think
That's, depending on the study, that's 50 to 70%. Yeah.
I mean, because one thing that occurs to me is, and everybody knows that all women go through menopause. It's not, it's a normal biological process, but some women have symptoms and some women don't exhibit symptoms. And that's just sort of an interesting distinction.
Mm-hmm.
It's as if the symptoms indicate that you're going through menopause, it's just more or less severe.
Right. Well, and you can have symptoms and find them not distressing too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like they might not be that intense. Like that's why I was saying there's the wide experience of what is menopause for people is so variable.
Yeah.
But the stereotype, what we were thinking was the stereotype was narrow and assuming it's one thing. And we might see that, but it's not the thing we thought it was. In this data.
I'm just thinking about two potential factors may impact the relationship can be job type and the workplace culture. There's a respect for workplace culture or total worker health. Hereby jobbers and people, it's probably the better environment for people to kind of disclose the situation.
Yeah.
You consider.
Yeah, for sure. Inclusive climate's gonna, I would hope, logically, it should make a difference. So we didn't manipulate that. We did in one of those studies manipulate the gendered nature of the work task and context. So in one of those, I think it was 3A, we had it be a construction engineering company with all men in the room versus a mixed gender, which all the other ones had been. Same effect, didn't change. It was still seen positively to disclose. Yeah.
Your resilience concept there makes me want to see the no symptoms, the control group or that one. You said it was that menopausal statement was
Better.
higher.
Yeah,
than even the control group.
Yeah.
It was the allergy higher as well than the control group. I mean,
No, the allergy was the same as the control group.
that it doesn't necessarily mean symptoms, but it's like it might
To resilient. Yeah. Well, there is also the stereotype of like the battle axe woman,
Yeah.
Like it could be activating that, which could actually have negative reactions to her because she's maybe seen as less warm. What's interesting is that when you have symptoms, you are seen as more warm. And I don't mean warm, like bodily warm. Like we actually took the item warm out, which our reviewer pointed out to us. We were just like, oh, duh, right, we should take that out. But interpersonally warm goes up when you have symptoms because you're kind of activating that kind of elderly pitiable group from the stereotype content model. So that actually helps you if you're seen as both agentic and warm. That's the ideal leader. So being the battle axe but with symptoms actually could be the best of all possible scenarios from a stereotype content model. Yeah.
Common question from Laura online pertaining to the last experiment. It would be interesting to do the same experiment but with a symptom related to brain fog. So if a person forgets something and says it's menopause,
Yeah.
does that have less stigma than they think there might be something else happening?
Yeah. So, I mean, you could also argue, what if we did one where she had menopausal rage, right? And there was a hormonal, like an emotional disorder or emotional reaction as opposed to physiological, right? Future research, like we couldn't manipulate everything. But the other thing I'll say, like brain fog, I don't know. I mean, we know that our aging brains are doing things. Is it menopause, or is it that we're aging, or is it that we have a lot on our freaking plates? Like, I don't know. It's hard to tease apart whether it's menopausal specifically, I think. And that's another reason I didn't focus on that. And I have found that when women talk to me about brain fog and I say, could it also be that you just have a lot of different roles that you're dealing with? They're like, oh, I like that. And it's just like it's just a shift, which is,
I have a question about the consent process. So when you're getting these people to fill out these vinaigrettes, how do you consent them to participate, fill them out without biasing them towards thinking about menopause and thinking about menopause positively?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, they're told that the study is about perceptions of employees at work.
Okay.
Very generally. Yeah. And that they'll be asked to do some ratings, and we're interested in how people appraise people at work when they're a new employee. And we also make it clear, like, first impressions are really common, and it's, we're just asking for your first impression. So we do make it very clear that they can have a negative reaction and that would be normal. Yeah. The rating actually would be normal. Do you have another question?
When you mentioned anxiety has a high stigma, I'm thinking, okay, if there's an employee with anxiety, they might need some accommodations, they might be, but it also looks like a great model to study as well.
Oh, yes.
And I just wonder if people have studied
Yes.
in the same way.
Yes.
Like, oh, I have anxiety.
Yes, that is more well studied than menopause in our field. More well studied.
Okay.
Yes, so Corrigan is someone who's known for studying mental health, mental illness stigma at work.
All right. And
Yeah, there's a whole model around that.
so there are benefits to disclosure in that, in general or not?
There is mixed, yeah. In
Yeah,
Corrigan's research, it's mixed. And disclosure, the stigma disclosure literature shows very clearly it's not always a good thing, and it depends on the type of stigma.
Yeah.
So one reason why menopausal disclosure might not be a bad thing is because it's recognized as not controllable. It's not your choice.
Right.
Versus if you're pregnant, it's seen as it's a choice. So there's stigma around that. If it's a transgender, it might be seen as it's a choice. So things that are controllable can be seen as worse. Also, how disruptive it's seen as another element. So menopause hot flashes may lack some of those features.
Right.
Mental health is mental illness is specifically one that's because it's seen as potentially disruptive and unpredictable.
Well, what about, it's PTSD, that's not a choice.
No.
Yeah, I mean, with mental health, it is, there's a lot of work being done now to really reduce the stigma in workplaces. And so I think over time, things are going to change, and it's going to be a lot more. Yeah, it's not going to change.
That's right. And some of your tools do that, right? They're addressing that stigma. And it's similar to what we're talking about here, like addressing the amount of resources that is now available for people to learn about menopause. Like,
Right, it's the same.
it's just
The more-
exploded.
The more normalized
yeah.
it gets, and the lower the stigma.
And that's, I mean, I was telling the students, I see part of my job as just saying the word menopause out loud as many times as possible. Because it destigmatizes when we can talk about it. And I can say, there's like an ad for that, right? I'm menopausal. I'm a menopausal woman. It's kind of like AA meeting, right? You stand up and say, I'm an alcoholic. I'm menopausal. Like there's no stigma. It just is what it is. This is what menopause looks like. It looks like a lot of different things. I'm giving you a headache. In hands, for those on Zoom, yes, you guys like head in his hands, like, oh no.
I did. The reason was I was trying to think about other things. I'm Brutus, was it? What is that one?
Oh, the artificial.
Yeah, what is it? What is it?
No, I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus.
So, right, I don't know.
Well, another workplace change I think of that's pretty radical in the last, 25 years is breast pumping.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine 50, 60 years ago that women would talk about pumping breast milk?
10 years ago.
Special rooms
Right.
for it. Now the most progressive companies have breast pumping.
Yeah. So this
So
is
it's sort of
absolutely.
the same categories.
The same category is instead of like a lot of the feminist scholars talk about the need for women to bend their bodies to fit in the corporate corridor. And instead, and I just love that turn of phrase, right? And instead it's recognizing maybe we need to bend the corridors to fit all bodies, right?
Yeah, totally. On that note, I'm gonna wrap.
We could go on and on.
Yeah, but